Welcome to lecture 13, in which we're going to look at African capitals. We're going to talk a little bit about Sub-Saharan Africa. Let me pull up some notes for you to share. There we go. All right, now remember, on your final, you're going to have to know some capitals. What I will do is give you a list of 40 countries. You will have to supply capitals for 20 of them. This isn't really that hard. You already know a bunch of them. And on the final, kids usually do really well on this test. In Africa, there are only two countries that I have you learn the capitals for. The first one is Egypt, and the capital is Cairo. Second one that I want you to be familiar with is South Africa. Now, South Africa is one of those countries that has more than one capital. There are a few of them around the world, South Africa being one of them, and they're usually divided according to the branches of government, and that is the case in South Africa. The executive branch is located in Pretoria. The judicial is located in Bloemfontein, and the legislative is located in Cape Town. The one I want you to remember is Pretoria. In most, when most people talk about the capital of South Africa, they're going to say Pretoria. So that's the one I want you to be familiar with. Okay. All right. So Cairo in Egypt, Pretoria in South Africa. All right. Let's take a look at Sub-Saharan African culture. This is kind of a tough thing to talk about. Remember, Africa is kind of like divided into two parts. You've got the northern part, which is Muslim, Arabic. Then you have the Sahara Desert, which is really the big divider in Africa. And then you have Sub-Saharan Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa culture is a tough thing to talk about. There are literally hundreds of tribes, each with their own little peculiarities, their own little cultural traits. However, there are some commonalities, some similarities among all the different tribes, and this is what I will speak to today. One of the big similarities is the colonization experience. Remember, all of Africa was colonized except for Ethiopia and Liberia. And it was not a good experience for the most part for Sub-Saharan Africans. They still, to this day, are rather suspicious of Europeans. Less so for Americans. When I was visiting in Africa 2 or 3 times, I was always made to feel very welcome. I never had any problems. However, I have been told by some Europeans that that's not the case for them. Suspicion, hangover from the colonial experience. Most of Sub-Saharan African is rural. Okay, more than half the population still lives on farms or small villages. This is changing. However, it is changing rather slowly. You'll still find lots of people living in the countryside. And because this is the case, this tends to affect the culture. There is a closeness to nature that you will experience out in the villages that you don't get quite as much in the big cities. When your living depends on getting enough rain for your crops, you're close to nature. When you live in the city, you might look out and decide whether you're going to take an umbrella or not if it's threatening to rain, but it's much more important what the weather looks like when you are living out in the country and depending on your crops for enough food to eat through the year. Interestingly enough, the religion in Sub-Saharan Africa is mostly Christian. This is a result of the Christian missionaries that came along with the colonizers. However, it is a Christianity that's just a little bit different. It is colored by tribal religion. The tribal religion still hanging on. But they are very zealous in their belief. I had a professor that was very familiar with Africa, traveled there all the time and talked about their culture. And he said that they are very zealous about their belief. He said he gave several examples of people he knew that would travel long distances to attend some sort of a special revival. Many of the people would have to walk for 2 or 3 days to get to a church meeting, but they were happy to do it. There is a real zealousness of belief. He talked about, and I've seen pictures of this too, talked about people that decorate their businesses or their buses or their cars or their homes with scriptures. And I guess it kind of makes some sense to it. You know, if you're going to take a cab and there's all kinds of scriptures written on it, maybe you feel good about riding in that particular cab. My professor talked about one beauty shop that he liked where they had written scriptures about believing in miracles on the outside of the beauty shop. So I guess even the most homely of people can go in there and believe in miracles. Now, I mentioned that it is colored by tribal and primitive beliefs. This is where witch doctors come in. In most hamlets there, even though they are a Christian place, they still have witch doctors, and most villages would have a rainmaker. I had an anthropology professor once that told us something kind of interesting in class. He said that the cure rate for a witch doctor is about the same as the cure rate for a modern European doctor or American doctor. And I immediately objected to that. I said, that can't be right. But he said, no, think about it. And then he proceeded to describe the what an illness would look like in each culture. And he said, now you get sick in America, what do? You go sit in a crowded waiting room with lots of other people who are sharing their germs with you. Then you're taken in and put in a little treatment room where you have to sit for another little bit while you wait for the doctor. Well, the doctor finally comes bustling in, and most doctors are limited how long they can spend with you. So maybe 10 or 15 minutes is all that you're allotted, and he'll quickly write you out a prescription and send you on your way, and you go home with drugs. The witch doctor experience, my anthropology professor explained, is much different. The witch doctor comes to your home. Okay, so you don't have to go out to some crowded waiting room. He comes to your home and he stays with you for the duration of the illness. He holds your hand. He mops your brow. He chants little incantations. He is right by your side and makes you feel loved. It's not some cold, sterile Western procedure where there's really no love involved, but someone actively is there caring for you, and this has got to make you feel better. And then my anthropology professor noted that, really, just about any disease you get, you're going to recover from, except for the last one, which will kill you. So yes, the cure rate is about the same according to him. Of course, then I challenged him and said, well, professor, if you broke your arm, are you going to a modern American hospital, or are you going to the witch doctor? And he smiled and says, yeah, I'll go see my American doctor. So anyway, very Christian, very zealous about their religion, but their religion does have shades of the old ways involved. Family is viewed as being very important, but it's more than just the nuclear family. Nuclear family being mom, dad, and kids. Their view of a family is much, much bigger. It involves cousins. It involves aunts and uncles. This same professor I had that was telling me about Africa related an experience that he had. He was working with a guy from Africa. The guy would come to the United States, and they were working on a project together. And of course, they got to know each other. And he asked him, well, how many children you had? And he said he had 6 children. And then as the project was drawing to a close, the African brought his wife with him. for the final little meeting that they were having, so she could see the United States and have a little vacation. And they had a big reception for them. And a couple of the people at the reception asked the wife how many children she had, and she said 12. And my professor heard the difference, and so he asked the African guy he was working with, "You say you have 6, and your wife says she has 12. What's with that?" And the African, he kind of smiled, laughed. "Oh, you Americans, all you do is think nuclear family. My wife just told you the number of children that typically are in and out of our house all day. That includes cousins of our children." So they have a wider view of family. Africans tend to live in more of a collectivist culture, where cooperation is the most important thing. And it's not necessarily concern about success for each individual. Your parents will tell you, yeah, you can grow up and be whatever you want to be. We just want you to be happy and successful. The concern in an African family would be more, what is best for the family? You know, if a family needs a doctor in the family, if that would be convenient, you may be pressed to become a doctor. They look at the goal, what's best for the family as a whole, rather than what's best for each individual. There is an importance of women in sub-Saharan African culture. Women are seen as intermediaries between the generations simply by bearing children. And this is deemed to be very, very important. There is something called a bride price in many places in Africa. The bride price is basically you pay for a wife. There's polygamy, that is one man having more than one wife, but polygamy is very common in Africa. And so what you have found, and this is going to kind of sound cold, and I don't want it to sound cold because there are loving relationships between men and wives, but a woman is kind of seen as an investment. You'll find that younger men, they tend to marry a little bit later because they have to come up with a bride price. Older men tend to have more wives because they have been around to make more money and purchase more wives. In many of the cultures, cattle are a big thing. So you have to purchase a wife with so many cows. And depending on the wife, she may cost more cows than another wife. If she's, a really vicious, mean person, nobody wants to buy her, and she'll go for very few cows. So there's this bride price. The better the woman, the higher the price. So young men really have to scramble to build up a herd in order to buy that first wife. And then they tend to get the wife pregnant very quickly because those daughters that are born into the family, those can eventually be exchanged for cows themselves. So it's kind of an investment. Women sometimes try to increase their value by proving that they can actually bear children. Now, virtue is very important in tribal or in African culture, but some women will get pregnant out of wedlock, bear the child simply as proof that, yes, look at me, I can bear children. And thus she becomes more valuable. Bride price is kind of an interesting little situation. There are lots of wedding rituals that would seem peculiar to us. There is bride kidnapping. Now, this isn't, it's not as brutal or bad as it sounds. Often that kidnapping will be done by the women of the family into which a bride is going to marry. And it's acknowledged, everybody knows it's going to happen. The women in the husband's family will go and snatch the bride and take her away, and they will train her about the new family that she's coming into. And this takes on several different forms. They will teach her about all the other people in the family. And so when you come into that family, you're going to know everybody's names. Maybe some peculiarities with some of the relatives. They will teach you about that. In some African tribes, there's tattooing. They will tattoo the new bride. In some other tribes, they actually teach a secret sort of language for just the women know. And they can, with signals or gestures, they can talk to each other, and so that their husbands and the males in the area don't know what they're saying. Lots of different things. Mostly it is designed to ease the transition for the young bride into the new family. Virtue is considered very important in many of the tribes. There's interesting little thing called reed dances in Swaziland and Lesotho, where all of the young maidens who are virgins come and they dance and they celebrate their virtue. These are relatively new rituals. They came about when HIV first came swooping into South Africa, and they realized that you can not catch this disease if you remain chaste before marriage. And so these reed dances have become kind of a big deal there. It's a celebration of virtue. Although at least in Swaziland, the king attends, and it was kind of a tradition that he would pick one maiden each year for his latest wife. This hasn't gone on for a few years, I understand. Okay, my professor would always, when he talked about the cultures of different places, give us do's and taboos. So when we happen to go visit there, we won't get ourselves in trouble. And he said that one of the things you really want to do when you're working with Africans is emphasize the small talk. People want to know who they're doing business with. And so those little pleasantries that we share, those aren't just made up words. They are really wanting to know about you. They're wanting to know about your family. Family is important. They want to know how important is your family with you. And he said he always, when he did business with Africans, made sure there was plenty of time for small talk. Says if you travel there, dress modestly. We were briefed on that when both in Egypt when I visited there and in South Africa and Swaziland. Particularly the ladies were told dress modestly. And interesting enough, they said be careful talking about death. It's kind of an important subject and often kind of taboo to talk about in some of the cultures there in South Africa. Okay, that wraps up South Africa. Remember, what you're going to need to know is those 20 countries that we've gone over. Be sure you're studying those. There is a little Satera test in the teams on Africa. Go through that, make sure you know them all, and you will nail this part of the test. Hey, have a great day. See you later. Bye.